In today's video, I'll be ranking all the captain options you may be considering for the largest double game week of the season, Game Week 29. First up for AFC Bournemouth, we've got Dominic Solanke, who has two fixtures this week against Fulham and Brighton. The positive for Bournemouth are that both of these fixtures are home fixtures. The negative is that they're coming up against two good sides pushing for a European spot. However, we have seen Bournemouth put up some good performances at times this season, and Solanke went through a real purple patch between Game Week 6 and Game Week 11. I think he's an alright choice for captaincy this week. Bournemouth will be desperate for a result, and as there are two home games, I think they might play on the front foot. I'm going to quickly discuss the Arsenal midfielders collectively, who have a home fixture versus Leeds this week. The Gunners impressed again last week with a fairly straightforward 4-1 victory over Crystal Palace. Once again, the points were shared around by the attacking players, with returns from Saka, Martinelli and Trossard. The issue I have with captaining an Arsenal midfielder this week is that you'd have to guess which player is the one who will return more than all the other double game weekers out there, and the likelihood is that the points will be shared around. I think there are better options elsewhere. The only option from Aston Villa I think most of you might be considering this week is Ollie Watkins, who has two away games versus Chelsea and Leicester. Watkins has now returned in all but one of his last 8 Premier League matches, and he's scored in 4 successive away games. He looks nailed to start under Emery, playing close to 90 minutes per game as the main attacker for Villa. I think Watkins is a good option for captaincy this week, as the teams Villa face, Chelsea and Leicester, haven't been putting up great defensive stats over the last month or so. The only negative for me is the fact that Watkins doesn't tend to haul FPL points often. Another team who I'd only consider one player from for captaincy this week is Brentford, and that player is Tony for his fixture away to Brighton and Man United. Tony was perhaps unlucky not to return an assist last week, but he did manage to avoid picking up a yellow card, meaning that he'll play in at least one of these two fixtures in Game Week 29. We all know how prolific of a goalscorer Tony is. He already has 16 for the season, and in FPL he's returned 5 double-digit hauls. The issue with captaining Tony this week is the risk of suspension, and also the fact there are two tough fixtures. I think he's an alright pick. Let's talk about Alexis McAllister. McAllister stepped into the role playing behind the striker in Game Week 23. And since then, his goal involvement numbers have massively increased. With Adam Lallana expected to be ruled out with injury till the end of the season, I don't expect to see another Brighton player playing that role week to week. The only thing to be wary of going for McAllister as captain this week is that he'll be part of the Argentina squad, and so may be a risk to start the first fixture in Game Week 29. I think for that reason I'm torn on where to place McAllister, but I think he's an alright pick for this week. Brighton have two matches this week against Brentford and Bournemouth, which may be decent fixtures from a defensive point of view. Estupiñán has now shown himself to be a great fantasy asset this season, with 5 assists, and he's only blanked in one of his last 8 matches. However, he's another player who'll be away with Ecuador during the international break, and so may be a risk to return in time for the first game. He's an okay choice, but I honestly think there are better options elsewhere, even in the Brighton squad, as I'd favour an attacker over a defender for this game week. Another player who's returning a ton lately is Mitoma. He's only blanked twice in Brighton's last 10 Premier League matches. He's another player who'll be off for international duty for Japan, but I expect him to be fully ready to start both of these games against Brentford and Bournemouth. Although at times he doesn't play as advanced up the pitch as the likes of March and McAllister, he is very clinical and can create chances against practically any opposition. I think Mitoma is a good option for captaincy this week, as he'll probably get close to 180 minutes in an attacking team that loves to score goals. Solly March is the final Brighton player I'll be discussing for the armband this week. March is having an incredible campaign so far, with 6 goals and 6 assists, and all of those 6 goals have come since the Premier League restarted in Game Week 17. One thing I've noticed recently with the way Brighton play is that March makes a lot of key runs in behind the back line, both centrally and towards the left-hand side. So he's no longer just playing as a winger, but also getting on the end of a lot of through balls for one-on-one situations. These factors all point me in the direction that March is a good option for captaincy in 29. To begin with, for Chelsea, it's Ben Chilwell for his double game week against Aston Villa and Liverpool. I'm just going to say it straight away, I don't like the look of these two fixtures from a defensive point of view for Chelsea. Both Liverpool and Villa have looked dangerous, and I would expect them to both score against the Blues. Prior to that disappointing 1-point return versus Everton, Chilwell picked up a goal and an assist in his previous 2 matches, so he does offer some offensive threats. He'd be a punt for captaincy for me this week. I think there are better options elsewhere. A better Chelsea asset to give the armband to this week is probably Kai Havertz. Because I expect Chelsea to concede in both these games, it would probably give you peace of mind captaining an attacker rather than a defender, and Havertz is probably the one to consider. He's now started 12 of his last 13 matches under Potter, playing close to 90 per game, and of course he has penalties, having scored 1 last week against Everton and 1 the previous week against Dortmund. I think Havertz is a good option for captaincy this week, as Chelsea's games are both at home and Liverpool especially can be exposed at the back. There's a fair few options you could consider from Leeds' attack. I've picked Bamford out here, but the following will apply to most of their players. We're all aware that on their day, Leeds can create multiple goal-scoring opportunities against any team, and last week they managed to put 4 past Wolves. This game week they face Arsenal away and Nottingham Forest at home, so it probably isn't the best set of fixtures to expect multiple returns from. Although Bamford has penalties, he's a minute's risk, especially with the return of Rodrigo from injury. In my opinion, all Leeds attackers are an outside punt for this week. Starting off for Leicester is of course James Maddison. The Foxes arguably have the best double game week of all teams this week, playing Crystal Palace away and Aston Villa at home. I have a funny story. Around this time last season when Leicester had a double game week, I captained Maddison and also had Barnes in my team. Maddison returned me a massive 50 points, and Barnes returned 17 points. This time round I don't expect Leicester to be as dominant, but they are a side that never struggles to score goals, and Maddison is usually involved. I personally think he's among the top captain picks for this week. His Leicester teammate Kelechi Iheanacho is another player some of you may be considering for the armband this week, mainly due to the Foxes' 2 appetising fixtures. After scoring 15 points and then 12 points in game week 22 and 23 respectively, Iheanacho has now blanked in his last 5 Premier League matches, and in game week 28 he was benched for the first time since game week 21. For those reasons, I think Iheanacho is an outside punt for captaincy this week. Yes, he's got good fixtures, but he's also a rotation risk with Patson Daka, and the worst thing is when your captain misses game time in an enormous double game week. Another very real captaincy shout for me this week is Mohamed Salah for his double game week away to Man City and Chelsea. Although these look 2 tough fixtures on paper, Liverpool are a team that love to turn up for the big occasions. They've already beaten Spurs, Man City, Man United and Newcastle twice this season. Salah has played close to 90 minutes in almost every league match this campaign, and since game week 17, he's been playing in a more advanced position on the pitch. The fact that he's on penalties and has a proven track record of returning big FPL scores reinforces my belief that he's a standout player for the armband. Next up it's Darwin Núñez for his double game week against City and Chelsea. With Liverpool being knocked out of the Champions League, 4th spot in the Premier League will be their sole focus. For that reason, I think Klopp plays his best team week to week, and from what I've seen this season, that includes Darwin in the front 3. He creates chaos for opposition defences and has one of the highest XGs of any player in the division. I think Darwin's a good option for captaincy this week, but not as good of an option as Salah, purely due to expected minutes and the fact that Salah is on penalties. The final Liverpool player you might be considering for the armband is Alexander-Arnold. With just 1 goal and 4 assists so far this season, Trent isn't performing like the fantasy asset so many of us are used to owning. What's interesting though, is that Liverpool have only kept 7 clean sheets this campaign, but 5 of them have come in their last 6 matches. However, You wouldn't expect them to keep a clean sheet against City, and Chelsea are performing much better lately, so you'd hope Trent could pick up some attacking returns. I honestly think there are better captaincy options elsewhere this week. Erling Haaland is the next potential captain option this week for his home game against Liverpool. City have played Liverpool twice already this season and lost on both occasions. To add to that, Haaland failed to score in both matches. However, this time round City will be at home, and Haaland has put up much better numbers playing at the Etihad. I think the outcome of this game and the points Haaland scores in FPL are completely dependent on which Liverpool side decides to turn up. I think Haaland's an alright pick this week, but there are probably other better options elsewhere in teams with 2 fixtures. Joining Maddison and Salah for great captaincy options this week has to be Marcus Rashford for his double game week versus Newcastle and Brentford. The last time Rashford had a double game week was back in game week 22, where he scored a total of 20 FPL points against Palace and Leeds. Although this week is arguably a much tougher set of fixtures, you wouldn't put it past Rashford to pick up a couple of attacking returns, as he is one of the most in-form players in world football in 2023 so far. He scored 14 goals and picked up 4 assists in the league this season, and much of that has come since the turn of the year. So the next obvious Man United asset to consider when it comes to captaincy is Bruno Fernandes for his double game week. Fernandes on the whole has performed well this season, although hasn't been as prolific in the FPL point scoring department as he has been in previous seasons. Although Fernandes is on penalties, his appeal this game week is somewhat dampened by the absence of the suspended Casemiro, because that means that Bruno will likely play further back on the pitch in a defensive midfield role. I do think he's a good option for this week, but I would be surprised if he scored big points. The final United asset to consider is Luke Shaw. Shaw has been fantastic for our FPL teams, especially in the second half of the 22-23 season. He's got 1 goal and 4 assists so far, and looks nailed to start under Ten Hag. I think Shaw is an alright captaincy option this week. Newcastle and Brentford won't be easy fixtures, but United have looked strong, particularly in the defensive department, and I expect them to end this game week with at least 1 clean sheet. It's just a question of whether Shaw can pick up an attacking return from somewhere. After a ridiculous run of picking up bonus points that spanned between game week 14 and game week 21, the FPL points have dried up a considerable amount for Kieran Trippier. Newcastle's 2 fixtures this week are against Man United and West Ham, and I wouldn't fully trust the Magpies' defence to keep a clean sheet in either of these games. Trippier's obvious appeal in FPL comes not just from clean sheets, but the potential for attacking returns, and just lately, Newcastle have struggled to come by goals. I think he's an alright option for this game week. One of the top scoring players in blank game week 28 was Alexander Isak, scoring 2 goals away at Forest last week. Callum Wilson has been in and out of the Newcastle side, struggling with both illness and injury, and although Isak is returning from injury himself, he's playing well and looks the favourite to start in that number 9 spot. Like Trippier, I think Isak is an alright pick for this large double game week. Yes, he's got a tough game against United, but Newcastle always tend to score at home, and their away fixture against West Ham certainly looks like a match he can get something from. Brennan Johnson has an interesting looking double game week 29 against Wolves and Leeds. Although Forest are one of the teams hovering around the relegation zone, they have performed well at times this season, and you'd expect them to score at least a couple of goals against these opponents. The good thing about Johnson is that he's on penalties, and whenever Forest score, he always seems to be involved, with 7 goals and 3 assists for the campaign so far. I'm putting Johnson as an alright pick for captaincy, because Forest debatably have the best set of fixtures for this week. Harry Kane is next up with his single game this week against Everton. Spurs finished blank game week 28 with a disappointing 3-3 draw versus Southampton after being 3-1 up. Yet again, Kane scored, and although he hasn't returned many hauls this season in FPL, his points have been ticking along on a consistent basis. For me, Kane is an outside punt for captaincy this week. He does have a good goal scoring record against Everton, but the issue with Spurs is that some weeks they can score 3 or 4, and others they barely challenge the opposition keeper. I just think he's too much of a risk to give the captaincy armband to this week. West Ham almost seem to have disappeared off the face of the planet when it comes to their FPL assets in the 22-23 season, and obviously that's because they've hugely underperformed. However, they do have a couple of home fixtures this week versus Newcastle and their relegation rival Southampton. Bowen was one of the standout performers in the previous Premier League campaign, but this season it hasn't been the same for him, with just 4 goals in 26 matches. In my opinion, he's right down the bottom of the list when it comes to captaincy options you might want to consider for this week. The final player I'll be discussing is Bowen's West Ham teammate Said Benrahma for those 2 home matches against Southampton and Newcastle. Similarly to Bowen, Benrahma and the West Ham forward line have disappointed this season, scoring a total of just 24 goals in 26 games. That being said, I'm actually going to put Benrahma slightly above Bowen in the pecking order when it comes to captaincy, because he seems to be on penalties and has returned a goal and 2 assists in his last 3 matches. However, because he's a minutes risk playing for a poor side, I do believe there are much better options elsewhere. So that concludes today's video. If you found it in any way useful, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to show your support for the channel, and I wish you guys a pleasant week off with the international break.